This case takes us to the USA, in the 1990s. Rita Huffman was a 48-year-old saleswoman and a divorced mother, living in a rural part of East Oneida. She was described as a friendly and hardworking mom. Rita shared her home with her younger daughter, Mandy. Her personal life was stable, and she was seeing a boyfriend at the time. In the days leading up to what happened, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Rita's daughter, Mandy, was 15 at the time and was a popular girl at school. She played on a softball team and was known as an outgoing, athletic girl with a bright smile. In the spring of 1995, she was finishing up the school year and was looking forward to summer break. But it was right around this time that a 25-year-old man drifted into the city. He was in Washington and rented a place just a few blocks from Rita Huffman's home. This man had no known connection to either Rita or Mandy. They never even knew he existed. Unbeknownst to them, however, the stranger in their neighborhood had taken a dark interest in their family. This man secretly watched the Hoffmans for weeks, studying their habits, while he indulged in violent fantasies of himself as a werewolf stalking his prey. One clear vulnerability in the Hoffman household was a sliding glass door at the back of their house. They often left this door unlocked. The family lived in a safe, semi-rural neighborhood, and they didn't obsess over security. It was a different time, and of course, there were no obvious warning signs. On the evening of April 12, 1995, Rita spoke with her boyfriend on the phone at around 10 p.m., and according to him, nothing seemed amiss during the conversation, which tragically turned out to be their last. However, sometime after 11 p.m., as the mother and daughter were winding down for the night, this unknown man set his horrific plan in motion. Using the unlocked rear door, the intruder slipped into the Hoffman house under the cover of darkness. The neighbors heard nothing. Inside the Hoffman home, Rita and Mandy were in separate rooms. Rita was relaxing in the living room when this man approached her, brandishing a knife and wearing a ski mask. Before she could even make a sound, the killer ambushed her and stabbed her repeatedly at least 31 times, primarily in the upper chest and the neck. With Rita's life fading, the killer headed upstairs to find Mandy. The killer wasn't as stealthy the second time. He never got the chance to launch a surprise attack. Mandy noticed the intruder, and when he tried to assault her, she bravely fought back. Defensive wounds across her body proved this, but the killer was a grown man. He managed to inflict several stab wounds to her neck and chest, just as he did to her mother. The only distinguishing act was the final blow, delivered with a powerful swing of a baseball bat to the side of her skull. And believe it or not, it was after the murders took place that the real depravity began. The order of these next events is not fully understood, but what is known is that after the killing, the intruder carried out several grotesque violations of an intimate nature on Mandy. He desecrated her body after her death. He then grabbed the baseball bat once more and used it to inflict horrific internal injuries. He then sliced open her torso, starting from the groin area, and began to rearrange her organs. It's also suspected that the killer consumed her blood, and the mutilation didn't stop there. The killer then drew his knife again and began cutting away tissue from Mandy's private area, which he then draped across her face. It's an act of grace many might not understand, but for them, it was the only path forward. According to official records, however, he refrained from the same intimate violation. It appeared that she was too old for his particular tastes. Nevertheless, he opened her abdomen, exposed her organs, and then severed her breasts, placing them on her nightstand. She, too, was left as a grim display, was posed in a demeaning way on the couch. The assailant had been inside the home for about 2 hours before leaving. As the next morning dawned, concern began to grow for Rita's older daughter, Angie, who lived elsewhere. Angie became worried when she was unable to get a hold of her mother or her sister by phone. This was completely out of character, as they always answered. So, later that morning, Angie got in her car and drove over to the house to check on her family. When she arrived, she found the front door locked, so she went around to the back, getting in through the same sliding door that had been left open. Inside, she was confronted with a scene of absolute horror. It was a sight no one should ever have to witness. The distraught sister ran to a neighbor's home, screaming for help, and the police were called immediately. And with that, the investigation into one of America's most gruesome murders was officially underway. Given the horrific state of the victims, investigators quickly concluded that robbery or financial gain was not the motive. The sheer brutality of the act pointed to a deeply disturbed and sadistic killer. The challenge was that the perpetrator had left behind no obvious clues, no fingerprints, no traceable DNA. Nevertheless, police began to piece together subtle evidence from the neighborhood and the crime scene. One of their first major breaks came from a neighbor's account. They reported seeing a black Chevrolet pickup truck parked near the Hoffman residence on the night of the murders, specifically around 11:30 p.m., which detectives determined was right around the time of the killings. This detail immediately struck investigators as significant. That very lead soon connected with another event from that morning. Around 11 a.m. on April 13th, roughly 2 hours after the murders likely occurred, a police officer had noticed a man sitting alone in a black pickup truck near the Hoffman home. The officer thought the man's presence was suspicious. The timeline was a perfect match for the window of the crime. As surveillance went on, detectives also secured a search warrant to gather physical evidence. The officer questioned the man for a moment. The man gave his name and claimed he was just out for a drive. Seeing no obvious signs of a crime, at that moment, the cop let the man go with a warning. He had no way of knowing he had just come face to face with a killer who had taken 2 lives just hours before. This information instantly elevated the unknown driver to a person of interest in the double homicide. The suspect was soon identified as a 25-year-old man who had recently moved to the area. However, there wasn't enough solid evidence to arrest him just yet, so authorities quietly placed him under 24-hour surveillance while the forensic work got underway. Investigators then started digging into the suspect's background. They learned he was staying in a rented basement room just a short drive away from the Hoffman house. A woman living in the same home told the police that on the night of the murders, this man had left the house at around 11 p.m. and didn't return until 2 a.m. The timeline was a perfect match for the window of the crime. As surveillance went on, detectives also secured a search warrant to gather physical evidence. While tailing this man, officers watched him discard an article of clothing. This item turned out to be a ski mask, soaked in what appeared to be blood. They retrieved it and soon confirmed that the blood on the mask was a match for one of the Hoffman victims. Chillingly, the blood was heavily saturated around the mouth area of the mask, suggesting the wearer had pressed his mouth against a wound, leading to the horrifying theory that this man had consumed their blood. On April 14th, just 2 days after the murders, investigators made another critical discovery. A 12-inch kitchen blade was found stashed in a garbage can, outside the building where the suspect's truck had been spotted by the officer. The knife was covered in dried blood, and it was missing from the knife block in the Hoffman's kitchen. This was the murder weapon. The police now had more than enough to take this man into custody, and so on April 19, 1995, a team of officers moved in on the suspect's residence and arrested him without any issues. The man in custody was identified as Jack Spillman III, but who was this guy? Really? Jack Spillman III was raised in eastern Washington, living a troubled and nomadic childhood. His mother had been married 4 different times, and her 4 kids, including Jack, grew up never knowing their real fathers. By the time he was a young teenager, Jack was already showing signs of antisocial behavior. He had a hard time in school and ended up dropping out in the 9th grade. After leaving school, he lived in a small Washington town, just drifting between the homes of friends and relatives. People who knew him in his late teens remembered a strange guy who kept to himself and had very few close friends. As a young adult, Jack became fixated on a bizarre combination of wolves and violence. He started collecting all sorts of wolf-themed items, posters, trinkets, even animal pelts. To say he was obsessed would be an understatement. According to people who knew him, Jack fantasized about being some kind of werewolf. He would imagine himself stalking human prey under the moonlight, preparing for a savage attack. And it wasn't long before Jack's violent tendencies started to show up in real life. As a young man, he racked up a criminal record in Washington state that included burglary, theft, assault, and vandalism. In 1993, when he was 23 years old, he and a friend were arrested for an alleged assault on a woman they'd met at a bar in Kent. The police report states that Jack offered the woman a ride home, but when she figured out their dark intentions, she fought back, but the men wouldn't stop. She later told police that Jack held her down while his friend tried to attack her. Thankfully, the woman managed to get away and went straight to the police. Jack was charged with first-degree sexual assault in connection with the incident. However, the charges were ultimately dropped for lack of evidence. But while Jack was locked up, he would fantasize about stalking women and the horrific things he wanted to do. Another inmate even said that Jack constantly talked about his dream of becoming a famous serial killer. He would talk about the things he wanted to do to girls with a disturbing intensity, even before he was released. He checked out books from the prison library, obsessing over how to get away with his crimes. That's where he learned to shave his entire body before an attack, to avoid leaving behind any hair or DNA evidence. After those charges were dropped, Jack was a free man. Now, Jack had the IQ of a fourth grader, even as an adult, so his career options were extremely limited. He bounced around between various low-wage jobs. At one point, he even worked as a butcher's apprentice, a chilling detail that prosecutors would later emphasize, given the methodical and gruesome way he took apart his victims. Some sources even claimed that the act of butchering animals was something he got off on. Following his arrest, Jack was charged in Douglas County with 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder for killing Rita and Mandy Hoffman. These charges meant he could face the death penalty. Under Washington state law, and given the absolutely horrific nature of his crimes, prosecutors announced they would be seeking the death penalty. By mid-1995, forensic evidence was mounting, and the case against Jack for the Hoffman murders was airtight. His trial was set for August of 1996. Jack first pleaded not guilty, and in his early court appearances, he seemed completely unfazed, despite the mountain of evidence against him and the possibility of execution. But then, he made a sudden reversal in the spring of 1996, just 4 months before his trial was scheduled to start. Jack Spillman III struck a deal with prosecutors. He agreed to plead guilty to everything he was charged with, and in exchange, the state would take the death penalty off the table. But then, in a shocking twist, Jack confessed to another murder. For reasons that are still not entirely clear, Jack volunteered a confession to the murder of another victim, 9-year-old Penny Davis. Back in September of 1994, Penny had told her brother she was just going for a walk and promised she wouldn't wander too far from their house. However, Penny never made it home that day. Her remains were discovered on March 28, 1995, in a shallow grave. Until that moment, Penny's case had been officially cold. But as a condition of his plea deal, he also confessed to Penny's murder, which brought that case to a close without a separate trial. Jack's confession to the murder of Penny Davis stunned some in law enforcement. Although they had suspected his involvement, given that he lived in the same building as Penny at the time, they lacked the concrete evidence needed to bring charges. Jack gave no detailed account of how he ended Penny's life, and with her remains too decomposed to determine a specific cause of death, Jack simply refused to elaborate. Perhaps the details were just too depraved to speak aloud. That said, investigators were aware that Penny's body had been posed in a truly grotesque fashion, in a manner chillingly similar to the Hoffman victims. It later came to light that Jack had actually returned to Penny's shallow grave after the murder, unearthing her corpse, to perform unspeakable acts on her body, before burying her once more. On April 30, 1996, Jack officially pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was just 27 years old at the time of his conviction. For the aggravated murder of Rita Hoffman, the judge handed Jack a sentence of life in prison, with no possibility of parole. For Mandy's murder, Jack was given a consecutive 70-year prison sentence. On top of that, for the murder of Penny Davis, he received a sentence of 45 years and 6 months. All sentences were set to run back-to-back. In total, Jack's effective sentence was life plus 115 years, guaranteeing he would never again see the outside of a prison wall. This outcome was essentially the same as if a jury had found him guilty, but decided against the death penalty. Throughout the entire trial, Jack remained silent and showed absolutely no remorse. He spoke only briefly to confirm his guilty pleas for the record. The courtroom was forced to endure some of the most gruesome details of his crimes as the prosecution presented the evidence for the official record. The victims' family members were also present, forced to hear the harrowing accounts of what their loved ones endured in their final moments. Now, a word of warning: if you decide to research this case after the video, crime scene photographs from these murders are available online, and they are among the most gruesome and disturbing images I have ever come across. When the trial finally ended and the courtroom grew quiet, what lingered wasn't just the horror of his actions, but the chilling clarity of his intent. This is what he wanted. He wanted the infamy of being a serial killer. His only real disappointment was probably that he was caught so soon. The evidence presented at trial revealed a man completely consumed by fantasies of domination and death. The methodical stalking, the sadistic desecration of his victims, the chilling returns to their bodies. In retrospect, detectives and prosecutors described him not as a man who lost control, but as one who meticulously sought control through unspeakable cruelty. Even after his conviction, Jack offered no apology to the victims' families. Detectives would later say he didn't feel remorse, he felt pride. Investigators who interviewed him characterized him as a sadist and a narcissist who took immense satisfaction in the notoriety his crimes generated. and while he occasionally cooperated during questioning, that cooperation was always calculated, never compassionate. It's widely believed he only told police about Penny to cement his legacy as a genuine serial killer, with 3 confirmed victims. The case of Jack Spillman is now infamously known as that of the Werewolf Butcher. Today, Jack Spillman remains locked away for life, a fate that ensures he will never harm another innocent person again.